Welcome to EJH British Cars. Today we're going to do a little bit easier. So we're going to rebuild a Lucas generator. It's probably a 20 amp, 19 or 20 amp, I'm not sure which. It came on a different car, came off the Sport 6 years ago, and it was a good generator, it was working, so I thought it'd be a good place to start from just to build a fresh one for the TR2. So let's go look at that. So here it is. As you can see, someone's already played with this at some point. It's been repainted, obviously, but also if you look, the screw heads are been on and off, so it's been apart at least once. It did come with one of those plastic type front pulleys, which is a narrow belt, which is no good to us, but I had a spare generator pulley here, so I'm going to use that. The plastic one fell to bits, so didn't bother to show that, but this typical thing, there's this nut and a washer holding it on, and I just used an impact wrench, take that off, easy enough. And the next thing to do is to take out these two long bolts. Oh, they're from the other side. Right here and right there. And also try to get some of those mud daubers in this thing, so you can see this mess down here is from that. So we'll be cleaning as we go. So these are well and truly stuck. I had to use this impact driver to get them started. Once I got them turned about a quarter of a turn, they're turning fairly easily now. So they don't actually look too bad on the ends. They'll clean up all right. Now these end plates should actually have a little nub on them, which will line up with a notch in the case, so we don't have to worry about alignment. And surprisingly enough, most generators, you'll see these holes here that they pivot on get worn. And this one, they're in really good shape, so that's surprising. This mallet. So I don't want to break these ends. You see that just a gentle nudge and they're starting to move. There they come. There we go. Lots of mud dauber. Look at this. This stuff's really kicked in there too. It's another reason why you shouldn't just put things on, hope they'll work. You don't know what kind of beasts have gotten into it over the years. That end bushing, bone dry. You notice it says, actually I think it says oil right there. It's kind of hard to see through the muck. But this is one of those things that nobody ever bothers to oil, and you'll wind up burning up this rear bushing. When this rear bushing goes out, it lets the armature move, and the clearances between the armature and the magnets is very minimal. It's for extra strength of the magnetic fields, and it winds up heating up the armature because they're rubbing, and then the whole generator is just no darn good. And I don't know if you can really see it in there, but there's a little metal plate with four. It's kind of a squarish looking plate, and there's supposed to be a piece of felt behind that. So we'll take a look at that later. So a couple of quick taps of the mallet's got this end off, and then that's just the magnets holding that in. So good news is I don't see any rub marks on those magnets in there. And this armature looks good too. I mean, it's filthy, but it's good. Actually, the commutator looks actually pretty nice. I mean, we'll clean it up. But considering, look how bad these brushes look. And that will be, well, actually it started this motor. That tore them up from them mud daubers that quickly. I mean, there's maybe an hour's worth of time on this motor So, to get any further, we're going to have to take that Woodruff key out of there. And there's a washer behind that. So that is a spacer. Got the Woodruff key out, just have to use a little, use a small cold chisel. underneath the front edge of it. Tapped it lightly. It was kind of rusty in there, but it came out all right. Shaft is pushed into that bearing, so it's got some rust. So I'm going to go to the wire wheel, clean this up, and then we'll see if we can't push it out. So I've put the small bearing remover shell on, which fits in there quite nicely, because we're going to really support this well, because we really don't want to break this little web coming in. And it came out pretty nicely. So I was worried because the clamshell was touching on this outer ring, and the inside of that plate for the bearing is 1/8 of an inch shorter, and I just gave it a light push and it moved pretty easy. I did also put some PV blaster on there first. So all went well. I suppose if we were being very cautious, I would have cut a washer in half or something and got it wedged in here so that the clamshell actually pressed right on there. So the next thing to do is going to be to get this bearing out, and this is just riveted in. We'll need to take the drill press and drill out these 3 rivets, and this will come right apart. So I drilled off the heads. I used a bigger drill that got it just about flat, and then I used a drill that was slightly smaller than the rivet shank, and here's one that I took out, and put that in, and you could see when it got far enough it pulled the little ring of rivet off. So I've done that without drilling into this plate because I didn't want to muck that up. So then this is on the anvil part of my vise, and this is just a socket that's approximately the size of this bump here, so it doesn't interfere with the rivet heads. And this is giving me a nice solid base. And using a drift, I just tapped it with a hammer and pushed the rivet out. Heel of my hand on the far side because this is hanging over the edge, but you see these come out fairly readily. The rivet's out. Here's the plate. We'll clean that up. Here's the bearing, and I expect we're going to need to tap that out as well. Oh yeah, that's coming right out. There we go. And out she comes. Here is some sort of a steel washer and a felt, which is against the inside of this bearing, like that, keeping it lubricated. So next, I'm going to take these brushes out. I have to undo these screws right here. I'm going to unwind that spring a little bit, get it out of the hole. There we go. And then the brush will just pull out the back, or it can go out the front. Either way, doesn't matter. All good. Yeah, take the spring off. So the spring, we're going to wind the springs, they tighten counterclockwise. So I want to make sure we get them back on in the right direction when we're done. So you guys remind me later, okay? So cleaned and painted all this stuff now. It's all looking pretty. So the next thing we need to do is pull this bushing out. So I own a tool to do that. It's this. Came from Harbor Freight. Blind hole bearing puller set. I suppose you can always just use a Dremel and cut the bushing in half. But I like to use this. This one fits. This one fits well. You can see it's tapered and it's got a ridge at the end. You put it in, wind it in, gets tight, and then it has a small slide hammer. Goes onto the tool. So it's got a couple of flats so you can use a tool on it, a wrench. Put the wrench on it, tighten it up. A little hard on the hands. So I took the Dremel and I just took a little groove out over there, and hopefully that will relieve some of the pressure to let it get out. My guess is that it's bonded itself to the inside edge of this casting, but we'll give it another whirl. Well, I managed to get it out. You can see where I went through the bushing just a little bit there, but mostly I just relieved it. And that's got it. And that way there, by not going too deep into the bushing, I didn't bugger up this hole in here. So, clean that out a little bit with some paper towel and some cleaner, and then we'll get the other bushing ready to push in. So while we got it apart, it's a good time to check this felt. There's this little metal plate down here. This is just a pick. You can see that. Yeah, it just looks old and compressed and not very absorbent anymore. Well, there it is. There's the felt that's in the bottom. And this looks an awful lot like the felts they use on the dipsticks. I wonder if one of those will fit. Let's try that out. So this is a felt that they sell to put on the end of the dipsticks. And if you look, it's a little bit thicker, and it's just a tiny bit smaller around. But what I did find is that the bandsaw, you can cut it down. So being a little bit smaller around, I don't think it's going to bother it. And I'm certainly happier having a new piece of felt in there. So we'll drop that in the hole. Alrighty then. And here's the new bushing. And we just need to press that in there. That shouldn't be very difficult. I think we'll probably just do that in the vise. Alright, so I've just got it in the vise. And I took a couple of easy pushes just to get it started and get it fairly square. As you can see, it's leaning out that way a little bit, so we'll put it back in. Put that side in a little bit first. And it's pushing fairly easily. I can tell that I'm pushing something, but I'm not having to reef on it, because if you do, you're just going to break something. Okay, so we got it pushed in. I did have to use a socket on there because it pushes down just about flush. The other one was sticking up just a few thousandths, and so I left that one up a couple of thousandths, but it's below this ridge, so you want to socket, otherwise you're just pressing against those edges, and that's no good. I put the felt and the retainer in after, and the felt went in no problem. But the retainer, when it's flat this way, is bigger around than the inside diameter of the bushing. I had to put it in vertically and rotate it and kind of squeeze it in. So if you can get it in before you put the bushing in, it's going to be easier, but it's not a deal breaker if you don't. Anyway, so we need to take some oil and soak this up here, and I'll probably put just a wipe of grease in there as well. So I just thought I'd show you, this is one of the new brushes. This is one of the old. Let me see how much that's worn down. If you recall, amazing. These had star washers between the tab and the bracket. So we'll make sure I got new ones. Nice stainless steel. And then we'll just screw these in. And it's a bit, if you remember that we decided that it unwinds counterclockwise. Well, I suppose it's the only real way it fits on here anyway. So it's only going to want about a half a turn in tension. So we'll put it on. Put it on. There it is. And wind it back to push on the bushing, the brush. There we go. I also ran just a small file through there just to clean all that stuff up. So that's the first side, and we just do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so here's the new bearing, and these ones are sealed bearings. So we're not going to be using that felt in there. And I think it should fit into here fairly easily. I'm going to push a little bit. There we go. So push the bearing in, and this is that little spacer washer because the bearing sits just below flush. Here's the retainer plate, and I've replaced the rivets with 1032 by 3/4 inch screws. And we're just going to put a bit of Loctite on, put them in. To go back, make sure they're all tight, because sometimes these things can pull down a little less than square, and then when you get the other ones tight, these first ones loosen up a little bit. So if you look at that, at 3/4 of an inch, there, disc flush. So, and the bearing still works. So now we need to push that back onto here. Well, it just about pushes on by hand. Now, I'll push it the rest of the way. So I'll go do that. So next I like to push this on. So I don't like to do it with the other end on, because it's, these aluminum things get pretty weak in their age. So this is a 5/8 deep socket, and that fits in there and pushes against the inner bearing race. Now I'm going to go do this in my press, but if you supported this well, you could tap this on with a hammer. This shouldn't be that tight. Anyway, so I'm going to go give this a push. So to put the end cap on, you want to set this in front of you with a spade connector down at the 430 position. You get the plate with the bushings in it. You just push the bushings back with your fingers, and that's why the spade's down here, so that it doesn't get in the way your finger's doing with the spades. And just set that in. It actually goes pretty easy. And then there, of course, is that little alignment notch. And then we put the 2 screws in. And you'll just tell, because you just turn it once or twice and then you can't draw it back. If you're having a hard time and you don't have the pulley on yet, you can just flip it over and you can see how the ends of the screws are lining up with the holes through the openings in the cover plate around that front roller bearing. And we just want to snug these down tight, because I put new lock washers on here. So it's just like everything else. There's a bit of rust inside the nut, and so I just ran a 7/16 20, tapping a die through the nut and through the end of the shaft just to clean it up, which it did. Nut went on right on after that, and I'll need to tighten that up with the air wrench impact, but the compressor's not on right now because you guys can't hear me if I got that running. So, but it's done. Got everything all painted up, cleaned all the terminals, new brushes, new bushing, new bearing in the front, still turns. This is obviously not tight yet, so that's why that's spinning around behind it. But, and yes, I did use a few tools to make my life a little easier, but I have done this in years gone by with just, basic stuff, particularly if you got a generator that hasn't been sitting in a pile of dirt and everything else for a couple of decades. That the push on the bearing here is not very tight, and you can actually disassemble this and leave the armature in the bearing anyway. So you can get this out, you can change the rear bushing, you can change the rear brushes, clean it up, you can oil that front bearing, because you could get in there with a little oil can or something. And you can also, you got to protect your threads obviously, but you can just put this, once the body's off, you can support this and tap it, get it off. It's not that tight. You just want to be careful, because these aluminum castings are 50, 60 years old, and they're really easy to break. So you can buy new ones, and if you've got, say most of these, these holes are usually ovaled out like crazy. You can buy new end caps now, which is nice, because in the old days you couldn't. You just had to, drill these out and trying to keep them centered, and then put a steel bush in to get them back in. And fortunately, with a belt-driven accessory, you can be off by a 1/16 of an inch or something, and it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I digress. So I hope you enjoyed that. I did it over a couple of days because I had to order some parts. I was hoping I'd had a bearing that would fit, and I did not. So, but it's not too hard, and of course it's nice to paint everything up. And then, of course, the time will tell when we spin it up to see if it makes electricity. You can test these. If you ground the body and put positive to the big lug in the back, this thing should motor. That'll tell you if it's working. That's the way we used to check them in a junkyard to see if they still worked. Anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next time.